Chapter 16, Sterile Storage and Transport. We have now reached a pivotal stage in the sterile processing cycle. It is crucial to understand that once an item has been successfully sterilized, the process is not yet complete. The item must be stored and transported in a manner that strictly preserves its sterility until the exact moment it is opened at the point of use. The primary goal of the sterile storage area is to protect the sterile barrier system, or SBS. We must strictly protect this packaging from three main enemies: physical damage, moisture, and dust. If the barrier is compromised in any way, even microscopically, the item is immediately considered contaminated. Because of this critical function, the sterile storage area is often described as the bank vault of the sterile processing department. Just as a vault protects money, this area protects your facility's most valuable inventory. These are the sterile instruments that have been created through the labor-intensive steps of cleaning, inspection, assembly, and sterilization. Let us begin with sterile storage considerations, specifically focusing on location and traffic control. The sterile storage area should be located adjacent to the sterilization area. This specific placement is intentional. It minimizes transport distances and significantly reduces the risk of contamination during the transfer of goods from the sterilizer to the shelf. However, while it is adjacent, it must be a separate, enclosed room. Access to this room is strictly controlled. This is a restricted area. Access must be limited only to authorized personnel who are properly attired. This restriction minimizes the introduction of airborne contaminants such as bacteria, lint, and dust brought in by general staff. Regarding traffic flow, sterile packs should never be transported through dirty corridors or general public areas unless they are properly contained or covered. We will discuss transport covers in detail later, but for now, remember that the flow is always from clean to sterile, never the reverse. We now move to the most data-heavy section for your exams, which is environmental standards. To prevent the growth of microorganisms and the degradation of packaging materials, strict environmental controls must be maintained. You must memorize the requirements found in ANSI, ASHRAE, and AAMI ST79 guidelines. First, let us discuss temperature. The temperature in the sterile storage area must be controlled to prevent heat stress on packaging materials and to maintain seal integrity. The general standard requires temperatures to be maintained below 75 degrees Fahrenheit. While some older guidelines or specific facility policies might suggest a working range of 68 degrees Fahrenheit to 73 degrees Fahrenheit, the critical safety limit you must memorize for the exam is: do not exceed 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Why is this important? Temperatures above 75 degrees Fahrenheit can compromise the integrity of the plastic and paper seals on pouches and wraps, and warmer temperatures promote bacterial growth. Second, let us discuss humidity. Relative humidity is a critical factor. It must not exceed 70%. High humidity, meaning levels above 70%, can soften paper-based packaging materials, like the paper side of a peel pouch. It can also compromise the adhesive on tape seals and promote microbial growth such as mold. However, the air cannot be too dry either. You must be aware of the low humidity limits. Humidity below 30% can cause static electricity and dry out certain packaging materials, leading to brittleness and potential cracking. So, the safe zone is typically between 30% and 70% relative humidity. It is important to note that these environmental parameters, temperature and humidity, must be monitored and documented daily. It is not enough to just set the system, you must verify it to ensure compliance. Third, we must address airflow and ventilation. The sterile storage area must be under positive air pressure relative to adjacent hallways and rooms. You need to understand the mechanism here. Positive pressure means air flows out of the clean sterile storage room when a door is opened. It pushes air out, preventing airborne contaminants from dirty or less clean areas from entering the sterile space. Regarding air exchanges, the ventilation system should provide a minimum of 4 air exchanges per hour to strictly filter and cycle the air. Finally, we must address lighting. Adequate lighting is obviously required to read labels clearly to ensure the correct instrument is selected. However, a critical preservation rule is that sterile items should never be stored in direct sunlight or near strong ultraviolet sources. Ultraviolet light degrades paper and plastic packaging materials over time, causing them to become brittle and compromising the sterile barrier. Having established the correct environmental conditions, we must now examine the physical infrastructure of the room, specifically the shelving and storage equipment requirements. Proper shelving is not just about organization. It is essential to protect the physical integrity of the sterile packages. First, let us look at the materials. The shelving units themselves must be made of materials that are easily cleanable and non-porous, such as stainless steel, metal, or durable plastic. Wood is never permitted in the sterile storage area. Why is wood strictly prohibited? Because wood is porous. It can absorb moisture, splinter, and harbor microorganisms, making it impossible to disinfect properly. A critical detail concerns the bottom shelf. The bottom shelf of every storage rack must be solid or fitted with a solid shelf liner. It cannot be open wire mesh like the shelves above it. The reason for this is to create a physical barrier between the sterile items and the floor. This solid barrier protects the sterile packs from splashes from mops during floor cleaning and from dust kicked up by foot traffic or cartwheels. You must memorize the following specific spacing dimensions for your workbook and exam. These are often referred to as the distance rules. First, let us discuss the distance from the floor. Items must be stored at least 8 to 10 inches, 20 to 25 centimeters, off the floor. This height allows the environmental services team to clean the floors underneath the racks without wetting the packs or hitting them with cleaning equipment. Second, consider the distance from the ceiling and sprinklers. Items must be stored at least 18 inches, 46 centimeters, below the level of the sprinkler heads. This is not just a hospital rule, this is a fire safety code requirement from the National Fire Protection Association, NFPA. It ensures that in the event of a fire, the water from the sprinkler can properly distribute across the room without being blocked by high stacks of boxes. Third, we have the distance from outside walls. Shelving should be positioned at least 2 inches, 5 centimeters, away from outside walls. This distance is necessary for air circulation. It prevents condensation caused by temperature differences between the room and the exterior wall, which could lead to mold growth between the pack and the wall surface. Before we move on, there is a concept often missed known as satellite sterile storage. It is important to know that these strict storage standards apply to any area in the facility where sterile items are stored, not just the main SPD. If you store sterile trays in the operating room core, labor and delivery, or an ambulatory clinic, those areas are considered satellite storage and must meet the exact same temperature, humidity, and shelving requirements we just discussed. In high-traffic satellite areas, closed cabinets are generally preferred over open shelving to provide extra protection. Regarding general storage hygiene, there is one strict prohibition you must respect, which is the ban on corrugated cardboard. Shipping boxes made of corrugated cardboard are strictly prohibited in the sterile storage area. Cardboard is porous and generates dust and lint. More importantly, it is known to harbor dust, insects, and mold spores from the warehouses and trucks it traveled in. Therefore, supplies must be broken out, which means removing them from their outer brown shipping boxes, in a separate breakout area before they are allowed to enter the clean sterile storage room. Furthermore, cleaning protocols for this area dictate that floors should be damp mopped using a germicidal solution. Sweeping or dry dusting is prohibited because it raises dust into the air, which can then settle on the sterile packaging. Additionally, the shelving units themselves must be cleaned regularly according to facility policy to prevent dust accumulation. Once the storage environment is prepared, we are ready to receive items. This is the moment items leave the sterilization area and enter the storage bank. For items sterilized in-house, proper cooling is paramount. Items must be cool to the touch before being removed from the sterilizer cart. There is a critical workbook rule you must understand here regarding temperature differences. Placing hot packs on cold storage shelves causes condensate, or moisture, to form inside the pack. Think of it like a cold glass of water on a hot day, but in reverse. The temperature difference creates water. Since moisture acts as a vehicle for bacteria to wick through the package, this results in immediate contamination. Therefore, do not touch or move packs until they are fully cooled. At this stage, you may also utilize sterility maintenance covers, often called dust covers. These are plastic bags used to protect items that are not used frequently. A critical exam point here is timing. Dust covers must only be applied after the item has completely cooled. If you place a warm pack into a plastic dust cover, condensation will form inside the plastic, contaminating the item. When handling these items, do not drag them. Lift them to place them on the shelf. Dragging can tear the wrap. We also have specific rules for high-level disinfected, HLD, items and liquid chemically sterilized items. First, let us look at high-level disinfected items, such as flexible endoscopes. These should be stored vertically in a well-ventilated cabinet. Hanging them vertically facilitates drying and prevents moisture buildup in the channels, which could lead to bacterial growth. Second, consider items processed by liquid chemical sterilization, LCS, such as those used in systems using peracetic acid. These items are wet when they come out of the processor, and they are not packaged. Consequently, these items cannot be stored. They have no shelf life. They must be used immediately for the patient, a practice known as just-in-time processing. If they are not used immediately, they are no longer considered sterile. Finally, regarding purchased pre-sterilized items, commercial single-use items, like sutures or implants, often have specific expiration dates printed by the manufacturer. Unlike your in-house packs which may follow event-related sterility, these manufacturer dates must be strictly respected. If a manufacturer puts a date on a box, that is the law for that item. Now that the items are on the shelf, we must discuss how to interact with them properly. This brings us to handling sterile packages. This section focuses on human behavior because even with perfect environmental controls, improper handling by staff is a leading cause of contamination. There is a golden rule you must always follow: minimal handling. Every time a sterile package is touched or moved, the risk of contamination increases. Therefore, handling should be kept to an absolute minimum. Items should ideally only be moved twice, once onto the shelf for storage, and once off the shelf for use. When handling is necessary, strict hygiene is required. Personnel must wash their hands properly before touching sterile items because the natural oils, dirt, and bacteria on your hands can transfer to the packaging material, potentially compromising it over time. There is one specific physical action that appears frequently on exams: the distinction between lifting and dragging. You must never drag a sterile package across a shelf, a cart surface, or a table. Why is dragging so dangerous? Dragging creates friction. This friction generates heat and abrasion which can cause microscopic holes, burn-throughs, or tears in the wrap, especially in the blue non-woven polypropylene wrap. You might not see these micro-tears with the naked eye, but they are large enough for bacteria to enter. The correct action is to always lift the item entirely off the surface to move it. Lift, move, and place gently. Remember the phrase, lift, do not drag. Furthermore, visual inspection is required every time a package is handled. Before you hand an item to a customer or place it on a case cart, you must look at it. Check for tears, holes, water spots, which indicate moisture damage, broken tamper-evident seals, or any signs of tampering. If any defect is found, the item is considered contaminated and must be sent back to decontamination for reprocessing. Let us discuss how items sit on the shelf. Stacking requires careful attention to the type of packaging. The enemy here is compression. Do not stack heavy rigid containers on top of wrapped instrument trays. The weight of the container will crush the wrapper. This causes compression, which forces air out of the wrapped package. When the weight is removed, the package expands and sucks air back in. This is known as the bellows effect. If the air being sucked back in contains dust or bacteria, the sterile field inside is compromised. Rigid containers are designed to be stacked, but only with other rigid containers. You must ensure the stacking mechanisms, such as the feet and latches, are secure and aligned so they do not slide off. Wrapped trays should ideally not be stacked at all. They should lie flat, side by side. If you have limited space and must stack them, they must be stacked lightly, meaning lighter trays on top of heavier ones, and very carefully to avoid crushing the wrapper material. For peel pouches, there is a very specific rule you must know for the exam. Peel pouches must be stored on edge, standing up like books on a shelf, inside a containment basket or organizer. They should never be stacked flat on top of one another. Stacking them flat prevents you from seeing the items clearly and, more importantly, the weight of the pile can compromise the sterile seals of the pouches at the bottom. From an ergonomics safety standpoint, heavy items should be stored on the middle shelves, often called the power zone between waist and chest height, to prevent back injury when lifting. Lighter items can be placed on the higher shelves. We now arrive at one of the most important concepts in modern sterile processing, event-related sterility, ERS. The definition is that sterility is not determined by an expiration date or time, but rather by how the package is handled and stored. The principle is that an item remains sterile indefinitely until an event occurs that compromises the sterile barrier. This concept replaces the old, outdated standard known as time-related sterility. In the past, items were given an arbitrary expiration date. If the date passed, the item was re-sterilized, even if the package was perfect. We no longer do this. Current standards dictate that sterility is event-related. You need to be able to identify what constitutes an event. The first is physical damage, such as tears, holes, or punctures in the wrap. The second is moisture. If a pack gets wet from a spill, condensation, or high humidity, it is contaminated due to wicking. The third is soil, meaning dust, dirt, or debris on the package. The fourth is tampering, such as broken locks or security seals. For the workbook and the exam, focus on the specific scenario of the dropped item rule. If a sterile package falls on the floor, it is considered contaminated. This is an event. It does not matter if the floor looks clean. It does not matter if the package looks undamaged. The force of the impact can force air and dust into the package or cause microscopic damage to the instruments or wrap. The rule is simple: if it drops, it is contaminated. Do not put it back on the shelf. It must be reprocessed. Finally, even though we use event-related sterility, we still manage inventory using stock rotation. We use the FIFO system, which stands for first in, first out. The goal is to prevent older supplies from degrading or gathering excessive dust while newer items are used first. When you restock shelves, place the newer items at the back or to the right. Move the older items to the front or the left so they are picked first. This is necessary because even with event-related sterility, packaging materials do degrade over years, and commercial items like implants still have hard expiration dates that must be respected. Moving beyond the storage shelves, we arrive at the critical phase of movement. We have now reached transport of sterile items. The goal of transport is simple but critical: to maintain the integrity of the sterile barrier during movement from the storage area to the operating room or other clinical departments. Sterility can easily be lost during this journey if protocols are not followed. Let us look at internal transport, which refers to moving items within the walls of your facility. First, consider the protocol for hand-carrying items. If you are hand-carrying a single item, there is a specific technique. You must hold the item away from your body. Why is this necessary? Because your scrubs are not sterile. If you hug the sterile pack against your chest, sweat or bacteria from your scrubs can transfer to the wrapper. You must also keep the item horizontal or flat. Do not carry an instrument tray vertically like a briefcase, as the heavy instruments inside can shift, damaging the delicate instruments or tearing the wrapper from the inside out. Ideally, if items are hand-carried, they should be placed in a clean plastic bag or tote bin to protect them from the environment during the walk. Second, let us examine cart transport. When using carts, there are strict requirements. The most critical requirement for your workbook, and one that is almost always on the exam, is regarding the bottom shelf. The rule states that transport carts must have a solid bottom shelf. If you are using an open wire cart, the bottom shelf must have a solid plastic or metal liner installed. This creates a shield. As the cart wheels roll across the floor, they kick up dust, dirt, and bacteria. The solid bottom shelf prevents these contaminants from flying up and landing on the sterile packs stored on the lower shelves. Regarding the covering of carts, the preferred method is the use of closed case carts. These are the metal carts with doors that seal shut, protecting the items fully. However, if open wire carts are used, specific rules apply based on your route. If you are only moving inside the sterile core, open carts may be acceptable depending on facility policy. However, if the transport route goes through general hospital corridors, elevators, or non-restricted areas, sterile items must be covered. You must use either a closed case cart or an impervious, meaning water-resistant, cart cover. Alternatively, you can place the individual sterile packs inside plastic dust covers. The goal is to protect the item from the uncontrolled environment of a public hallway. We also need to address elevators and dedicated lifts, sometimes called dumbwaiters. Dedicated lifts must be used solely for clean and sterile items. You should never use a clean lift to transport dirty instruments, as this contaminates the shaft and the lift car. Regarding general elevators, clean and sterile items should not share an elevator with dirty case carts if possible. If they must be shared due to space limitations, there must be strict physical separation and containment. The clean items must be fully enclosed. Now we move to off-site transport. This section covers transporting items to remote clinics, surgery centers, or satellite offices. Transporting sterile items between buildings via truck poses significantly higher risks due to environmental fluctuations and physical movement on the road. First, you must ensure environmental control in vehicles. The transport vehicle, whether a truck or van, must be temperature and humidity controlled. There is a specific exam warning here. You cannot transport sterile items in the trunk of a personal car. Why is this prohibited? Because the temperature in a car trunk cannot be monitored or validated. Extreme heat in summer or freezing cold in winter can destroy packaging seals. Furthermore, trunks are generally dirty. Sterile items must go in a dedicated, climate-controlled delivery vehicle. Second, you must ensure physical protection. Items must be placed in rigid, cleanable transport bins or totes that can be secured. You cannot just stack wrapped trays loosely in a van. During driving, items will shift, turn, and fall. Rigid bins prevent the items from being crushed or punctured during transit. Finally, regarding separation, clean or sterile items and contaminated items must be physically separated within the vehicle. If the truck carries both, delivering clean and picking up dirty, there must be a physical barrier or strict separation protocols to prevent cross-contamination. In conclusion, remember the analogy we started with. The sterile storage area serves as the bank vault of the healthcare facility. The value of the entire sterilization process, including the hours of cleaning, inspection, assembly, and sterilization, relies entirely on proper storage and transport. If a sterile package is dropped, compressed, or exposed to high humidity during this final phase, all previous work is lost. More importantly, if that compromised item reaches the patient, it can cause a surgical site infection. Any lapse in temperature control, handling, or transport protocols renders the item unsafe. Before we finish Chapter 16, let us review the key terms one last time to ensure you are ready for the exam. First is sterile storage, an area specifically designed to store sterile supplies and protect them from contamination. Second is event-related sterility, ERS, the concept that sterility depends on the occurrence of a contaminating event, not strictly on the passage of time. Third is first in, first out, FIFO, a stock rotation system where the oldest supplies are used first. Fourth is breakout, the process of removing commercially purchased supplies from their outer corrugated shipping containers before they enter the clean sterile storage area. Fifth is relative humidity, the amount of water vapor in the atmosphere. Remember, the critical limit for your exam is, do not exceed 70%. This concludes our study of Chapter 16, Sterile Storage and Transport.